Hey, what's up? David Cohen here for Learn LFX, and welcome back to another exciting Fusion tutorial. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to create this 3D ocean effect inside of Davinci Resolve without using any external footage. So let's get started. So to start off, you want to go to this gearbox over here and make sure that your project settings are set to 1920 by 1080 for the project resolution, and your timeline frame rate is set to 24 frames a second. And I already did that, so I'm going to click cancel, but you're going to want to click on save. So then I'm going to go over to the media pool here and right click and select new fusion composition, and I'm going to call this ocean, and I'm going to leave it at 5 seconds long, frame rate 24 frames per second, and I'm going to click on create. So I'm going to grab this fusion composition and drag it onto the timeline. Make sure that your composition is selected and that the playhead is over it, and we're going to head on over to the fusion tab. So now that we're in our fusion tab, I'm going to grab this media out node and drag it to the corner where it won't be getting in our way. And I'm going to control spacebar or command spacebar if you're on Mac. I'm going to search for turbulent noise. And this is a free plugin that you can get on our website, and I'm going to put the link in the description. And I'm going to get rid of this merge node that Fusion created automatically, and I'm going to drag this turbulent noise all the way to the left, so we have a lot of space to work. So if I send this to the viewer, you can see that it creates a very interesting pattern, and we're going to be using this to create our water. Now, it doesn't look like water right now, but if we change a few settings, it will look really nice. So I'm going to go over to the color tab here, and I want to bring the alpha of the black up. So now we have a nice solid color. And I want to go to the size here, and I want to unlock the X and Y size. And I want to change the X size to 2. And the Y size I want to change to 0.3. So this is actually a little bit too tight, maybe 0.4 is good. So yeah. And it animates by default. We already have this nice wave-like motion. Even though the preset is set to fire, the noise type is set to fire, this is the one that most closely matches water, and this is the effect that we want to go for. So I'm just going to rename this node. I'm going to call it pattern, and we're going to be using this one quite a bit to create our water effect. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a cook torrents node. And this is the most realistic material we have in Fusion, so I use this one all the time. I don't use like Word or Blinn a lot. This is the one I use the most. And I'm gonna pipe this pattern into the cook torrent. So I'm just gonna right click over the output of the pattern and pipe it over the node, the cook torrents node, and I want to make sure that it goes into the diffuse color material input. As you can see, the cook torrents node has lots of inputs, and you want to make sure that you get into the right one. So if I look at the cook torrents node now, you can see it looks absolutely nothing like water. It looks like a moon rock, but doesn't look like water at all. And this is Fusion's material viewer. It allows you to change the position of a light. It changes the camera rotation around the object. And we're going to be building our material in this material viewer. So I'm gonna rename this cook torrents node to base underscore material, because you cannot have spaces in node names. And I want to change a few things. I want to select this base material, and I want to go to the specular, and I want to bring the roughness down to 0.1. And I want to go to the diffuse color. I'm just going to close the specular. Just want to close it. And I want to go to the diffuse color, and I want to open the color picker. And I'm going to type in the manual. I'm going to manually type in the values for hue, saturation, and value. So for the hue, I want to be somewhere around 0.65. For saturation, I want to be somewhere around 0.5. And for value, also 0.5. So now we have this dark looking material. It looks a little bit closer to water, but we're still far away from our final result. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bump map node and make sure that it's bump map and not create bump map, because this is the one we need. This is 3BU because this is the one that creates a 3D bump map. The other one is for 2D. So I'm just going to create it. I'm going to add one of those. And right away I'm going to rename it to height. Or it could be, I could have named it waves actually, but I'm going to pipe this into the input of the bump map node. And I want to bring up the height scale to 50 all the way up. And now we have our waves. And we're going to use this to add some depth to the material. So one thing to note right now is that bump maps do not actually change the geometry at all. Like if you have a image plane and you pipe in a material that looks bumpy, because of the bump map, it doesn't mean that the image plane is being distorted or anything like that. The geometry doesn't change at all. It just creates like an illusion that that the lights are reacting with this bump map, and it makes it look like the material is being bent or bumpy. But the image plane is as flat as it was. It doesn't change the depth of the geometry. It doesn't change the shape of the geometry at all. So I'm gonna pipe this bump map into the bump map material input of the cook torrents of the base material, and it's already getting there. It looks a lot better. It looks closer to water. We're almost there. There's still a few things that we need to add to make it look like water, but it's already close. At least it doesn't look like a moon rock. So the next thing I want to add is a little bit like of a glare. Like when you look at the water, when you look from above, you have like this glare. It's called we have this glare, and I want to add it. I'm gonna add it with a fall off node. And what I'm going for is actually not the glare. I want to add like the sort of fresnel that you see when you're looking at the water. So I'm going to rename this node. I'm going to rename it to fresnel. So FRSNEL. The names of the nodes don't matter, by the way. I'm just doing this so if I come back to this comp, let's say in a week or 2 weeks, I want to be able to see what I was thinking at the time I was making this comp. So it makes things a lot easier when you open the comp later, when you have the nice organized nodes with correct names, and you can see what's going on and how things connect to each other, and it just makes a very clean comp. So I want to view this fall off node, which I named fresnel, and a few things I want to change here. I want to go to the face on color and I want to bring it to 0. So now we have black in the middle and white towards the edges. And the glancing color, I also want to change that. I'm just gonna close this face on color here. And I want to go again, I want to change the hue to 0.65. I want to change the saturation to 0.75 this time, and the value 0.5. So that's looking good, and I want to make this thing a lot tighter, so I'm just going to bring the fall off down till I get a really nice looking fresnel. And this is a sphere, so you can't really tell fresnel on the sphere. You can't really see it because I'm just moving around. It's moving, you just can't see it. So I can change the shape so you can see it better. I can right click on the material viewer and go to shape and select plane. So now you can see it a lot better. When the angle between the camera and the surface of the plane is sharper, it gets lighter, and when you're looking directly at it, it's darker. So that's exactly what happens with water. This is called the Fresnel effect, and this is what we want to add to our material. So I'm just gonna right click again, and I want to change the shape back to sphere. This is just for preview purposes. It doesn't do anything, the sphere or the plane, or you can change it to a torus even. So now I want to add this to our base material here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a channel boolean and make sure that it's this icon here, 3BOL, and not the regular BOL, because this one's for 2D. We want the 3D one. So I'm going to add that. And I want to change the operation for the red, green, and blue. I want to change it to A plus B, A plus B, A plus B. And the alpha, we can just leave it the way it is. So I want to add the Fresnel on top of our water. So I'm just going to add that here. And if we view this, we see that we have this nice looking fresnel going on here, and it makes it look a lot more like water. You can see before and after. It just makes it look a lot better and a lot closer to what we're looking for. And this is almost done. We are almost done with this water material. We just want to add a few more things. So I can just rename this here, this channel booleans. Oh, sorry, that was my mistake. Control T. You want to make sure that the base material is the background and the fresnel is the foreground, because the fresnel's alpha is completely transparent. Not completely, but translucent anyway, semi-transparent, and we don't want that. We want a solid alpha. So I'm just gonna rename this channel booleans. I want to rename it. Again, I did the same mistake. I want to rename it to add underscore fresnel. And to make things go faster, I can right click here on this play bar and turn off high quality and turn off motion blur, and that's gonna make things update a lot faster. It's gonna be used like use like half resolution media instead of full resolution, and it's not gonna do things like anti-aliasing and stuff like that. It's only for the preview. When it renders, it will add the anti-aliasing, but for the preview it won't. So we're almost done here, and the last thing we want to add to make it look really realistic is reflections. We want to add reflections because water reflects. After all, we want to make it look realistic. So to add reflections, you need a environment reflection map, something like this. This is an environment reflection map, also known as an HDRI map. So this is a 360-degree panorama, and from bottom to top it's 180 degrees. So it's an entire sphere, and it's all the reflections that you use for any material. Any material needs a reflection map. Even things that are like really rough, like stone or stuff like that, or brick, you still need to use a reflection map. But in the beginning of this video, I said that I'm not going to be using any external media, and that's a bit of a challenge, but we can, and it's better to use a real reflection map, but we can get around this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a day sky node, and this is basically a really simple environment reflection map, you can say. I wouldn't use this for any good looking material, like if you want to make like a really realistic brick or anything like that, you wouldn't want to use this. You want to use a real reflection map. But for our project here, it actually works pretty fine, especially since I couldn't find a good reflection map that was that fits the scene that we're using. So I'm just gonna rename this day sky, and I'm going to call it environment underscore map. Okay. And this, actually I want to change a few things here first. So an environment reflection map has to be 2:1 aspect ratio. It has to have this aspect ratio, 2:1, because this was explained to me actually by my good friend Andrew Hazelden. So you want to have 360 degrees from left to right and 180 from top to bottom, and 360 in compared to 180 is 2:1. So that's what we want to do. We want to have a 2:1 aspect ratio. So I want to use 3840 by 1920, but if you are using a small computer, you can use 1920 and 1920 divided by 2. You can use math in here, by the way. So 960, and that's a 2:1 aspect ratio. That's fine. And we don't really have much detail, and we don't need a very large environment reflection map. So I might as well use this size. I wanted to use 3840 by 1920, but since there isn't really that much detail going on here, I'm just going to leave it like that. And one more thing you want to do is you want to go to the depth, and you want to set it to float 16 so you don't have any bending or stuff like that. And I probably should have done that for the turbulent noise too. I want to go to the image, and I want to change the depth to float 16. You can use float 32 also, but it's actually, but I think it's overkill for this project. You only need it if you have values that go above 1 and below 0. That way you can keep the precision of a floating point number. So I'm going to look at the environment map again, and to this I'm going to add a sphere map. And always when you want to make reflections, you want to add a sphere map. And this, now I'm gonna actually use it to map reflections. So I'm gonna look at our material here. This is our material. And to this I wanna add a, you guessed it, reflect node. So here's our reflect node, and by default it doesn't do anything because it needs a reflection map. So I'm gonna use this as our reflection map. Again, right click over the output of this sphere map and pipe it over the node of the reflect. And the reflect has lots of inputs, and that's why I like doing this little trick here to make sure that it goes into the right input. So I'm gonna pipe it into the reflection color material. And right off the bat, it doesn't look very realistic. It doesn't look very good here. And you can guess what's missing. What do you think is missing with this? What's wrong here? Our reflections are mapping to a perfect sphere, and our material isn't a perfect sphere. It's a bumpy sphere. We use the bump map. So if I pipe this bump map into the bump map texture input of the reflect node, we have much better reflections, and this is our water material, and it looks really nice. That's basically it for the material. Now we can go about setting up our 3D scene. So I can rename this reflect node. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to change it. Reflections. And this is basically our material. We can group it actually. We can group it, but I don't want to do that right now. I want to keep it open to be easier to use. It's pretty clean. And I'm just going to move the media out node again because we need even more space. And I'm going to add a image plane 3D. Actually, I'm going to add a shape 3D and change the type to plane. It's already set to that by default. And in an image plane 3D, it doesn't have much subdivisions by default. It doesn't have many subdivisions. If you want to see what the subdivisions look like, you can go to the wireframe. And these are the subdivisions that we get by default. They're not enough. These are not enough to make ocean. So what I want to do is I want to bring this up. 40 isn't enough either. I want to bring it to 250. And I know it looks pretty tight, but we're going to need this extra detail. You don't want to go overboard though, because the more subdivisions you add, the longer it will take to render, to process, to calculate the reflections and stuff like that. So you want to keep it a high number, but you don't want to go overboard with this. And technically, if we wouldn't be displacing the shape, we wouldn't need that many subdivisions at all. But since we're going to be adding a display so we can actually see the waves, that's why we need this this extra level of detail. So I'm just gonna rename this, and I'm gonna call it surface. And I want to change the size. So I'm gonna bring the size up. I'm just gonna bring it back, and I'm gonna change it on the transform tab. So I'm gonna turn off wireframe visibility right now, and I want to turn on the lighting. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go to the X rotation and change it to -90. Don't make the mistake of changing it to 90 because that's wrong, and I'm going to show you why. This is actually a good chance I have to explain this. So if I have a point light, right? If I have a 3D scene, I have a image plane and I have a point light and merge 3D. You can see that when I have this light, this side of the plane is completely dark. Even though I have a light, it isn't reacting to it. And the problem is that we rotated it to 90 instead of -90. So what happens are that the normals are on this side, and the light only reacts to the normals. So if I bring the light down like this, then the entire thing is light. So that's the problem that we have here. So you can actually view the normals by, actually we have too many subdivisions to view normals. So I can bring the subdivisions level down just for the sake of an example, and right click on the 3D viewer and show you what the normals look like. So where is that? 3D options, vertex normals. So we can see that all of our normals are pointing this way, and that's wrong. They need to be pointing up. they need to be pointing to the part that we're going to be viewing and not away from the part that we're viewing. So that's why I want to change the rotation now to -90 instead of 90. Long story short, right? And now it reacts to the lighting as it's supposed to, like that. See? I can bring back the subdivisions to where they were. The subdivisions were at 250. And now we're completely overloaded with normals. You can see all of them here. But they're still pointing the right direction. So I'm going to go back to 3D options and I'm going to turn off the vertex normals. And this is just an example. We don't need this point light or this merge 3D yet. So I'm going to pipe this in here into the surface. And we can see our water. It looks really realistic. It reacts to the light. I mean, there's no light. We didn't add a light. And if we render it and turn on lighting, we'll see a completely black image. This is just for the sake of preview. Fusion's viewport comes with a light, like a sort of an example light, so you don't have to go through the trouble of adding a light in the beginning of your artistic process. So this is pretty small, this surface. I want to go back to the transform tab and I want to bring the size up probably to 25. So we have this very nice looking ocean here. You can see it's pretty big, like that. And you can see that it animates. It looks really nice and realistic. But what I was telling you before, it looks as if that the surface is bumpy. But if you look really closely, you'll see that the surface is actually flat. It's a plane, so planes don't have like a third dimension. It's just, yeah, they don't have depth. So we want to add a little bit of displacement to say. We want to actually change the geometry, and that is exactly why we added so many subdivisions. So to do that, I want to add a displace 3D, and I'm gonna rename this. I'm gonna call it 3D waves. Oh yeah, so you can't add a number in the node names either. Alright, that's fine, but what I want to do is I want to use our pattern here as a map for the waves. So I don't want to drag an input here, and I definitely don't want to copy and paste a copy here because that will make the calculations longer, and I don't want to do that. It's just a waste because we aren't changing anything. It's exactly the same thing. We're just doing this for the sake of keeping the flow clean. So what you can do is you can right click on the flow, go to add tool, flow, and wireless link. You could have actually done that with control spacebar, search for wireless link, but I just have so many of them here. I don't know which one is the original. So that's why I use the menu like that. And I'm gonna drag, make sure that this wireless link is selected by the way, and drag the pattern into the input of the you just drag it onto the inspector, into this input parameter of the wireless link. And I'm just going to rename this to pattern underscore link. And I'm going to use this as a displacement map. So if you view this, look, we have the exact same thing here. It's just as if you have a wireless thing here. You don't have these wires here that are making the comp cluster. So I'm just going to pipe this into the displace 3D, the 3D waves. And if I view this, sorry, you can see that the waves are way too high. It's overdoing it way too much. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring the scale down just to make it really subtle, and the bump map makes it look even more intense than it actually is. So if you want to actually see what the geometry looks like without the bump map creating an illusion and making you do the wrong thing, you can just unplug the material so you can see what it looks like really subtle waves going on here, and they are animated obviously, which is very hard to see. So I'm gonna maybe bring up the scale a little bit. Yeah, there it is. And I'm gonna pipe our material back in. All right, so now I want to set up our camera. So setting up a camera is one of the hardest things to do when you're setting up a 3D scene. You want to make sure that you choose the right angle, and the camera is kind of hard to work with. I mean, you have to change the view all the time to the camera's view to see what the camera sees, and it's actually pretty much a pain. So what I like to do, this is a cool trick I saw in one of the old Ion tutorials. So I'm just gonna choose what I want my scene to look like this, and I set up the 3D view. I give it the perspective that I want to have in my final render. So I just push it quite a bit, like that. I try to give it a nice perspective. I choose the perspective that I want, and now I'm going to grab this 3D camera and I'm going to drag it in to the viewport while my 3D shape is selected. So Fusion is automatically going to create a camera 3D, and not only that, it's also going to create a merge node, and it's going to give the 3D camera the perspective that you had while you were looking in the viewport. So you have to be very careful right now, because if you move left and right, you're actually going to be moving the camera. And to fix that, you want to right click over here and change your view to perspective instead of camera. So now you can move around and the camera is going to stay where it was. So one thing I want to add, the next thing I want to do, so here's our 3D scene here. I want to add a light. So I'm going to call it point light. I'm going to grab a point light and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to just call it light because we're only using one light. And the camera I'm going to rename, I'm going to call it camera. And the merge 3D I'm going to rename, and I'm going to call it scene. That's basically it. So now I'm going to pipe this light into the scene. And as you can see, things changed a lot because the ambient factor of the lighting is now gone. Point light does not have any ambient factor. An ambient factor basically means that areas that are dark, even areas that are dark, get a little bit of a boost from the light, and we don't want that. It's not. It just adds it equally to all parts of the image, and that's just wrong. It's not like global or illumination or anything. It just adds. It's just an add. So I want to change the position of the light. I want to move it around. And you can see these nice specular reflections as if the sun has like a glare over the water, and it looks really nice. I like how it looks. And now we can add a render 3D and we can see what this looks like. And as you can see, we have the perspective that we gave the camera in the beginning. And actually we have to turn on lighting. And now it looks really good. We can actually see what it looks like. We have our nice lighting, we have our specular, we have our waves. It looks really cool. But the only problem here is when we're gonna render this, it's not gonna have this checkered underlay. It's gonna be black behind here, and we don't want it to be black. We want to actually have a 3D scene. Unless you're using this as an overlay, you can do that if you want. But I want to actually add an environment around this, around the sea, around the ocean. So I'm going to grab another wireless link, and I'm going to do that again with the Add Tool menu. Wireless link. And I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it environment underscore link. And I'm going to make sure that it's selected. I'm going to grab the environment map and pipe it in there. And these wireless link nodes are very useful if you have like a really large comp and you use the same media again and again and again in the comp. So you can just have it somewhere in the corner of the comp, those 3 loader nodes or 4 loader nodes, whatever media that you're using. And you can just use these all over the comp and you can have a nice clean comp. So I want to make it look nice, as if there's an environment back there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna view this just to make sure that everything's working nice. I'm going to add a shape 3D, I'm gonna send it to the viewer, and by default it's an image plane, and we don't want an image plane, we want a sphere, so I'm gonna change the shape to sphere. And I want to bring up the size by a lot. I mean, 10 isn't enough, I want it to be something like 50. So we have like a very nice big sphere, and we're inside the sphere. And the only problem is, that we see the lighting affect the sphere, and I don't want that. I want to go to the lighting, and I want to uncheck affected by light. So now we are inside a white sphere. So that's pretty nice. And I'm just going to close that. I want to bring up the subdivisions by a little bit. Don't want to go overboard, but just so we don't see any like jagged edges. So now I'm going to pipe this environment map into the shape 3D, and we are looking around, and we see our environment. We see a sky. So if I add this to the merge 3D, and I want to rename the sphere here also, I'm going to call it world underscore sphere. And if we look at our 3D scene, we can see that we are looking at the sky behind the water. And if we look at our render, we can see that we have our sky, and that our water is affected by the light, but the sky isn't. So another thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of depth of field. As you can see, we have like a little bit of aliasing going on here, but that's okay, because we're not using high quality. If we turn that on, then the anti-aliasing turns on, and we have a higher quality image. And it's going to, this is just for the preview, because when it renders, it's going to use high quality anyway. So one thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of defocus in the back. And the way to do that is we need to extract a depth pass. We need to render a depth pass. So I like using the OpenGL renderer for a depth pass. First of all, because the image, the color channels come out as a higher quality with anti-aliasing, better anti-aliasing at the final render, and it's faster, and it's just better when it comes to adding auxiliary channels like depth, like normal depth and stuff like that. It just adds less artifacts, and that's really good. So I might actually, before I do this, I want to go back to the scene, maybe change the camera angle a little bit. Where's our camera? It's over here. So this might be a little bit high. So what I can do is I can put the render 3D in one viewer and the scene in another viewer, and switch to dual viewers. So I have like a live update on what's going on, and I can bring the camera just a little bit higher, like that, and that's looking pretty good. Maybe a little higher even. Yeah. So that looks much better. It doesn't look like the waves are so massive. So I can switch back to single viewer, and we can get back to what we were doing. So I changed the renderer to OpenGL renderer, and I want to go to the output channels, and I want to output a Z channel. So a Z channel is basically depth. You want it to be black towards the front and white towards the back, and we're going to use that to drive a defocus node. So we added our Z channel by selecting this, and now if I view the Z channel, you're going to see it's solid white, and that isn't helping us at all. We can't do anything with this. We can't do anything with a solid white image. But if you look down here at the color values, you'll see that we have a Z value that goes from -1 until minus like 60. So we will need to remap these Z values, and the way to do that is by using a copy AUX node. So I'm just gonna add that, copy AUX, and I'm just gonna bring this up here, and I'm gonna view that. So I want to change the auxiliary channel to Z, and I want to remap. I'm going to enable remapping, and this looks a little bit better, and I want to change it to dual viewer actually. So I have the color, I want the render to be in the viewer 1, and the Z-pass, the output of the copy auxiliary channels node, to be in viewer 2. So now I'm going to select the copy AUX node, and I want to sample the min. So I want it to be over here. This is going to be our minimum, and that's going to be our max in the back. So I want to sample that. And now we have our Z-pass. Might look pretty simple, but we have like some detail going on here, and it's pretty good. It's good enough for what we're doing. I mean, there is some aliasing going on here, but that's completely fine. And what we can do to get rid of that is, it's actually cheating, but we can add a blur node and blur by like half a pixel. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's blur is the simplest form of anti-aliasing. It isn't a very good way to do it. It's cheating, but for what we're doing right now, it doesn't really matter. We can actually bring the blur size to 2 even, and it won't make that much of a difference. It'll just get rid of this crunchiness of the edges. So I'm gonna go back to single viewer, and you know, I wouldn't do this for any kind of like a complicated scene where you have to protect the edges, like if you have a chair or if you have furniture or like a room and you want to add some depth of field to it. I wouldn't blur the Z-pass. It's not a good idea, because then you'd have like a haloing effect on the edges, and that's just not a good thing. It's not a good way to do it. The Render 3D in OpenGL mode has optional anti-aliasing for auxiliary channels, and you can enable them one by one depending on whichever auxiliary channels you're rendering, and that would be the right way to do it. But again, this is a very simple scene. We don't need to preserve any edges, so we can cheat a little bit like that. We can we don't have to go all the 9 yards just to make a simple render. So I forgot to rename a bunch of nodes here, so I'm just going to do that now. I'm gonna change this to renderer, and here I'm gonna copy, and I'm gonna rename it to Z underscore pass. And this one I'm gonna rename this. Sorry, I'm gonna rename it to anti-aliasing. It isn't anti-aliasing, but it's pretty close. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use this Z-pass that we've been creating for like for a while now. Yeah, I just need to I need to view this render 3D, and I'm going to use it to drive a defocus node. So to the render 3D, I'm gonna add a defocus, and oh yeah, if you're using the studio version of Davinci Resolve, I recommend using the lens blur instead of defocus. It has like options for your own iris. You can use your own iris. It's much better. It's a resolve effect, so you can't get it in the standalone version of Fusion, and you can't have it in the free version of Fusion, but it only works in the paid version of Resolve. So I'm going to take this anti-aliasing and I'm going to pipe it into the defocus node, and I'm going to view that. And as you can see, it isn't really working because the whole thing is being defocused equally. And the way to fix that is to go select this defocus node, go to the settings, and change this channel. This is the mask channel from alpha to luminance. So now it's very in focus in the front and out of focus in the back. This is still a little bit too much. As you can see, we have like a nice iris shape here, but it's still too much. I want to bring the defocus size down just so we have like a little bit of defocus, and that looks much better. So we're almost done here, but there's still like a little problem. We have these specular highlights going on here, and these specular highlights are caused by the light. That's probably about right here in 3D space. And when we're looking at our picture here, we don't see where this light is coming from. So optionally, this is completely optionally, I'm going to add a lens flare using our premium plugin LensMaster Flares, and you can get this on our store. I'll put a link to this in the description below. Or you can go online, get a picture of a lens flare, and just position it until you make it look like it's right. Like you can get a whole bunch of PNGs online. You can just position it, make it look right. But with LensMaster Flares, we can actually link it. We can link the light to the position. We can link the flare to the position of a 3D light, and I'm going to show you how to do that now, just to add a little bit of extra flare. So I'm going to add LensMaster Flares. And if I view this, you'll see that nothing has changed. We just get these on-screen widgets, and the reason is because we didn't choose a preset yet. So I'm gonna open the preset browser, and I'm gonna choose a lens flare, maybe this one. These are all sun-inspired lens flares. So I want to try this one. This one looks nice. And I can close the preset browser, and I'm gonna get rid of this LensMaster Flares node. And if I view this, you'll see that we have a very nice flare. So we want it to be somewhere approximately about here, but I want to actually link it to a 3D light. So how I would do that, okay, we have quite a bit of a mess going on here, but let me just show you. Let me make some space, take these nodes, drag them a little bit. It's always good to have some extra space. Yeah, so now things are looking better. So actually this is still a little bit messy, but now it's better. So to get the position of a light, of a 3D light, to a 2D point, we're going to need to use a locator 3D. And I'm going to just pipe this into the 3D scene. And the locator 3D also needs a camera, so I'm just going to pipe that into here. And put it over here. And the locator 3D has a position. This is the translation. So I want to link this via expressions to our light. The translation only. The rotation doesn't matter, the scale, everything else doesn't matter. So I want to link the translation of our locator 3D to our light. So I'm going to go over to the light here, and I'm going to go to the transform tab, and I'm going to pin it. Make sure that it's pinned here. And I'm going to go back and select our locator 3D. And I'm going to take this little pick whip here from the X expression, and I'm going to drag it down. As you can see, since we pinned it, it's on the bottom of the inspector here. And I'm going to, with the pick whip, I'm going to just drag it over the X screw control, and it's going to link it. It's going to write the expression itself. That's why I love this pick whip here. I could have written this by hand, but it'll just take forever. And it just automatically writes the expression, and it's going to link our X position of our locator 3D to the X position of our light. So I'm going to do the same thing for Y, and the same thing for Z. And now I'm going to go over to our LensMaster Flares. I'm going to close it. And I'm going to right click on the light position and connect to locator 3D 1 position. So it's actually very high up. So that's fine. This is the position of our light in 3D space. So I'm going to switch to dual viewer again. And in viewer 1, I want to see the 3D scene. And in viewer 2, I want to see my render. So I'm just going to move this around, and I'm going to move the light down, and it won't be affected by if I move it back, only left to right. Oh, actually it is affected a little bit, so I'm just going to move it around. And now the reflections on the water, the specular lighting, is being affected by the light, and we have a very nice representation of this light as a lens flare. So that's basically it. I'm just gonna pipe this warm light into the media out, and this will make it available on the edit and delivery tabs. You can do some You can do some things in the edit tab and then render it on the delivery tab. And that's basically it. I'm gonna put links in the description where you can get turbulent noise for free. And I'm gonna put a link where you can check out LensMaster flares. And that's basically it. I guess it's a wrap for me, guys. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Until next time, I'm David Cohen, and this is Learn Now FX.